Yesterday there was a tornado in Kansas. People are angry because the equipment they need is in the Middle East. I see the news in a crowded bar where I'm watching the second round of the playoffs. Utah has called a timeout, and for a minute the station rolls pictures of splintered houses and turned over cars. The governor wants to call out the National Guard, but the guardsmen are serving tours overseas. Then a solemn reporter grips the microphone. The sound is turned off, so I can't hear what he's saying. Just read the capsule summaries below the screen. There's a table set up with free hot dogs. A boy in his early 20s drinks near the window. His girlfriend comes in just before the hat and kisses him on the cheek. She presses her side against him. It makes me think of Josie, the way she would sit next to me. It was the summer of 1995 when we first got together. She had just graduated college, was drinking heavily, and preparing to travel in Europe. While she was away, I sent long letters up to 40 pages post-response to whichever town she was heading to next. They weren't love letters so much as diaries written by hand. 2 years later, we were living in Chicago's Ukrainian village. By then, I'd overdosed on heroin, and Josie was overcoming a cocaine habit. We spent time on our front porch. The neighborhood was changing. Rents were going up, but it wasn't there yet. It was a long way from there. There was so much concrete, and if you look east, the concrete rose from the ground and became the buildings downtown. We weren't far from Harpo Studios, where Oprah ran her empire. We were miles from the lake, and the city was hot, and the village was all red brick and white cement. I don't remember there being any parks in that neighborhood. Josie had a job at a recruiting firm downtown, but I couldn't seem to do it. I worked temp assignments, but was always getting fired. "Why don't you get me a job?" I asked. "I will," she promised. Josie had convinced me to return to Chicago with her. I had been living in Los Angeles for 6 months, working as an assistant on a TV show called Second Noah, about adolescents whose parents had died, or whose parents had abandoned them, and who'd been taken in by a family in Florida. It was supposed to be a modern version of the Brady Bunch, but the producers had no understanding of what happens to children at that age without parents. When the show was canceled, I got work as a driver and stole all of the presents out of Leonardo DiCaprio's fan mail, which I was delivering from his agent to his publicist, and gave them as Christmas presents. One of the presents was sheer silk underwear, which I gave to Josie, but they were cut for men and drooped sadly around her thighs. On the drive back from LA, Josie and I almost got married at a 24-hour chapel in Las Vegas, but didn't. To make up for it, I bought her an engagement ring from a quarter machine at a Kmart outside Salt Lake City, and we slept the night in the parking lot during a snowstorm. We were 24. The apartment we ended up with in Chicago was long with high ceilings. The landlord left threatening, incoherent notes. There was a man on the corner who sold elotes on a stick covered in butter and cheese. We were just 2 miles, maybe less, north of the United Center where Michael Jordan played. What I'm trying to say is that I loved Josie, but things didn't work out. A year later, Josie went off to law school in Washington, D.C. She offered to stay in Chicago with me and attend a lesser school, but I said I didn't want to be responsible for her bad decisions. Then I was accepted to the University of Virginia Law School. I'd taken the law school admissions test at Josie's urging and scored well. I could start the next year, and Josie and I would be within easy driving distance. We would hike the Blue Ridge Mountains. I broke up with her instead. "I just thought we would always be together," she said, and I know part of me felt good about it, like I had won. For 2 years, more, before we stopped talking altogether, Josie wouldn't take me back. She met someone else fairly quickly because she was desirable. And I mean, not just beautiful, but the kind of woman who smiles a lot and likes to have a good time and thinks for herself. She had confidence. She was fun to be around. 5 years after Josie and I split, I met her on a train. It was a coincidence. There were 10 cars, so even on the same train, the odds were stacked against us. I was spending a weekend in a city I didn't live in anymore, and I thought she had moved away. But there she was, in a polyester sleeveless brown shirt, without makeup, reading a paperback. She was like everybody else in that train, coming home from work, except she had better posture. I sat next to her. reading over her shoulder, and she ignored me until I started to poke her. Then she turned and we started to laugh. "What in the world?" she said, shaking her head and smiling, closing the book on her lap. She looked lovely, but not as lovely as she would have looked if she had known she was going to see me. If she had her lipstick on and some blush, I don't know what I would have done. As it was, she was working as a lawyer for the Labor Relations Board and getting married to Tony, who was one of my best friends from college. We were no longer on speaking terms. I convinced her to get a drink with me, and we went to a bar where the pipes were broken and water poured from the ceiling into buckets set across the floor. "This is wonderful," I joked. "We're having a drink inside our metaphor." Eventually, Tony came, and by that time I was very drunk. He was still tall, muscular, and strikingly handsome. I considered hitting him, but that was unlikely to turn out in my favor. "Why didn't you tell me you were dating her?" I asked Tony. "I'd have gotten over it eventually." "It was you or Joe, and I picked Joe," he said. After a little more talk, Tony said they were considering a move to North Carolina. "Why would you do that?" I asked. "Property's cheap," Tony said, "and there's less crime." They lived in a condominium Tony's parents owned in a rundown building at the end of Lakeshore Drive. The neighborhood had not changed in years. There was no more crime now than before, but they were talking about something else. Earlier today, I talked with a woman I know in Virginia. I locked the door to my office, turned on the camera in the computer, and took my clothes off for her. She told me to turn around, and I did. Then I sat naked at the computer and typed. It was ridiculous. I also spent the day preparing for class. If I can keep teaching, I'll be fine. Not really, but I'll have enough money to make it for a little while. The classes are ending in a couple of weeks, and I have nothing new scheduled. If I agree to move to some small town and meet the professor, I can get on the tenure path. I could buy a house and teach people how to write. I'd have to sleep with my students then. Away from the big city would be my only option. But that's not really open to me. It's not really what I want to do, which is what got me on this track to begin with, arranging interviews with murderers, hoping to make sense of somebody else's crime. There's a woman missing. Her husband says he didn't kill her. There's a man who says he killed 8 people, but won't say who they are. There are so many unanswered questions. It's been a long time since I knew what I wanted, since I had something to strive toward. I keep floating, head poking above the waves, waiting for a purpose to arrive like a boat in the middle of the ocean. I never did meet anyone like Josie again. Women like Josie don't make it to their 30s without getting married. If you're going to meet someone like that, you're going to meet her in your early 20s. And if you're like me, that's going to be a time when you're making your living selling drugs out of your freezer, living in a squat a bullet away from Cabrini Green. You'll have to represent something, like the other side of the tracks, but safe. Someone who, when the time comes, when the party's over, she can turn around and guide to a place where life is a little more predictable. But when the party was over, I didn't want to turn around. I didn't want to go to law school or get a real job or love only one person forever, though in many ways she was the most lovable person I was ever going to meet. It didn't matter. I had to test my dissatisfaction. She had gone east, so I went west. I got a job in a ski resort, bartending on top of a mountain. I learned how to board and disappeared in the snow. That was another time. I've been in San Francisco 9 years. I'm suffering side effects from the Adderall. There are always side effects: insomnia, loss of appetite, headaches, obsession, erratic decision-making, inconsistency. I took my pill early in the day, but I'm still awake and full of thoughts. So I lie in bed with my windows open, glad to be alone. It's the middle of the week. I haven't been sleeping and I'm missing appointments. My nails are bitten down, I'm bleeding. All I can do is document it all and see where it leads me. I'm taking my meds, and the world will be a different place for a while. I have a self-published book I wrote when I was with Josie, and another book of unpublished poems. I never showed them to anyone. The poems are so full of anger. Anger at Josie for being better than me, for always having the upper hand, for loving her family and being loved by them in return, for being someone who got over things and not recognizing that I was a person who didn't get over anything. But I read that book and those poems and I see something else. I see who I was then. This is who I am now. Thank you.